and Jean are going to lead Gold Team, and basically lays down the plan, not really listening to anything the professor said, and just kind of ignoring him. And also, the Gold and Blue Team are from the comics. We have seen this before. And we can see the divide in this scene. Professor X explains that he almost recruited Bastion as a member of the X-Men because Cerebro picked him up, and basically explains that since he is a technopath, he is essentially the new Master Mold. He controls all of the Sentinels, all of the Prime Sentinels. He is the mainframe that is in charge of everything and powering everything. So Charles basically tries to come up with his own plan, but then at the same time, Sunspot's like, yeah, but wasn't it your plan to leave Magneto in charge, and he's now one of the bad guys? Cyclops interrupts and basically says, look, I've told you all what we need to do. Going to Muir Island, then we'll split into our teams. Let's get to work, team. And Professor X looks at him, realizing that it's kind of Cyclops in charge right now, and they don't really like Professor X right now. And we talked about this previously, but I do believe that this is going to lead to a division with the X-Men. We see that in this episode, but in Season 2, I don't think we're going to have the same X-Men team, and I don't think Cyclops will be a part of the team. More on that in a bit. So we learned that Forge and Beast basically make a collar that can neutralize technology. Basically, if they put that on Bastion, he will be powerless and cannot communicate or control the Sentinels and Prime Sentinels. So that's the X-Men's plan. They break off into two different teams. Blue Team to go and find Magneto to try and get him to reverse what he has done, and Gold Team to go and take down Bastion once and for all. Also, something to point out here is that Storm does come back, but she has no idea what has happened. She has no idea what happened with Madeline prior. Remember, she was not there for any of that, but notice that that's not really addressed here. She just comes back and is happy to see her fellow X-Men and her sister Jean, although she has no idea what just went down with Jean. They do kind of allude to this later on. They're in the plane and Storm's about to jump out. Jean tries to stop her and Storm says, I thought of you while I was away. My sister left articles that she had been facing. And then she says that she's a survivor, Phoenix, so she was most likely referring to previous events, not what she was about. Then Rogue has a movement with Professor X, which again shows us that there is a divide between the X-Men and some of the X-Men who are looking to Professor X. Professor X talks about Gambit, and they even talk about the Thieves Guild, who recruited Gambit originally. But talking about Gambit just makes me upset. You can tell that she does play someone in that plan. Professor X. She does say that he's sorry for Gambit, and he even mentions Moira, who again should have a connection to Moira Island. So they want to go and fight Magneto, but Magneto brings it to them. And this is possibly one of the best monologues that we've gotten ever in the history of Marvel. He talks about how he's intense Professor X's dream. Professor X lived in the X-Men, the X-Mansion, the dream that mutants and humans could live side by side in peace and harmony. And he made mutants believe that they could actually be saved. Genosha specifically mentions Bleach, who told him at the beginning of the series that he didn't have to be afraid anymore. However, the attack against Genosha, Bleach ended up dying right next to Magneto. Magneto explains what he saw, his eyes literally being vaporized from his skull. So now Magneto is done, and he's basically made the new Genosha asteroid him, and he tells all the X-Men that they've gotten to where they are right now. They attack Genosha, humanity, making them the Prime Sentinels, everything by following Professor X. All himself controls. Follow him, and Rogue follows. And notice that she's wearing Gambit's coat. She gives it to Professor X as she leaves. And then, of course, Sunspot, because, well, he was betrayed by his own family. That's enough to do. He also breaks Jubilee's heart, holding that very, very importantly, might I add. He says, well, this is left here. She says, me. He's like, nah, just powers up and leaves. Doesn't say anything at all. The Muir Island and originally went towards Cyclops. Couple things here. One is that Cable really does again acknowledge that Jean is not his mother. The clone of Jean, Madeline, is his mother who physically birthed him. And Cyclops essentially says, look, it is confusing, but Madeline is gone, and Jean is who Madeline was cloned from. And both of them are obviously very similar and two of the strongest people that he's ever known, so give her a chance to be that mother figure. She, after all, does share all of the memories that Madeline had, even the memories and the feelings of giving birth to Nathan, aka Cable. Then, of course, I already posted this on Instagram last week, but we get this epic scene where they kind of poke fun at the Fox X-Men. Cyclops throws Cable a new X-Men suit in which he asks if he's going to a war or a circus, and Cyclops says, what you'd expect. Black leather, which is a direct reference to what he said to Wolverine in the X-Men 2000 movie.
What do you expect? Black leather? You actually go outside. What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Professor X meets with President Kelly, but he is doing this psychically. As you can tell by the background, it's all space. And even President Kelly is saying this all happened because you left your legacy to a psychopath, to Magneto. So you can really tell how everybody is really upset with the Professor. But even in this moment, Professor X still kind of does defend Magneto. He says he's not a lunatic, he's a survivor, and time has proved his worst fears over and over again, essentially saying he has a reason to believe what he believes, but at the same time, rely on my X-Men to get the job done. And this moment is just incredibly awesome as we see the X-Men slip into some original comic accurate costumes, which are just fantastic. Jean's Marvel Girl, Cyclops' blue costume, Wolverine's brown and yellow one, Storm, who we've already seen in already, and Rogue, who seemingly was already wearing something extremely similar to this before she left for Magneto. And then of course, Professor X's. So the two X-Men teams, Gold and Blue, go their separate ways. Then Jean and Cyclops have a moment before going their separate ways as well. Now again, Storm and Jean have this moment where Storm mentions Phoenix, and the end of this episode leads us to believe that Jean has died. However, I don't think she actually has. I think she's going to return as Phoenix. And even when Rogue is leaving Magneto, she says, who's going to be next? Jean? Is Jean going to die next? Been there, done that. Which could also be hinting that, yeah, she might seem to have died at the end of this episode, but yeah, that's happened before and she's came back. So I have hope for Jean. So Gold Team heads to Bastion, and he is more than ready for them, connected to everything. He controls a mass amount of Sentinels for a huge army that he has, and again, he is connected to each and every one of them. Storm and Forge fight them off, while the rest of them go on the ground and search for Bastion. Then we get a really epic fight here with Beast, Morph, Jean, and Cable. Morph turns into the Hulk, and Hulk smashes, or as he says, Morph smashes, and it looks like Jean even helps him fly, smashing the head off of a Sentinel, flying into a diner that says DeMayo's Diner, which is a reference to writer Bo DeMayo of X-Men 97, who has done a fantastic job, but unfortunately, due to some circumstances that we do not know about, he was fired. Beast drops his classic liners that we love, makes quick work of some Sentinels, even slapping one with its own hand, but of course the big part here is Mr. Sinister showing up to Jean, and he wants her for experimenting, and he tries to essentially convince her to go with him, saying, all I know you and Madeline begins. If you want to know, I can tell you. When I swapped you, so you can know what was yours and what was Madeline's. Did you marry Scott or not? Did you have the Phoenix Force, or is that Madeline? It's tempting, but in this scene, we essentially find out that Jean is confused with everything, that Madeline is with her. She carries Madeline with her, and we see just an epic fight here. Jean using both walls of their psychic powers to fight against Mr. Sinister. It is worth noting that she essentially defeats Mr. Sinister. It actually takes Cable coming in, being controlled by Mr. Sinister to defeat Jean, which we'll talk about in just a bit, because meanwhile, Blue Team arrives at Asteroid M. And side note, still no idea why Wolverine is on Blue Team. Why is he was adamantium all throughout his body, going up against Magneto, into something that is always baffling him. This will continue to baffle him. He should run in Gold Team, but it resulted in a pretty epic ending to this. So the X-Men start to fight Magneto, Rogue, Sunspot, Rogue tackling Wolverine, Professor trying to go up to Magneto and reason with him, still saying that thousands are going to die, but Magneto says thousands of mutants died at Genosha, and whose lives matter more than mutants. It's the basic Professor X and Magneto here. The difference is, it truly does seem like Magneto cares that much more, still cares a little bit. He doesn't really care about what Professor X's friendship means to him at the moment, because he's done. I don't believe he wants to kill him or anything like that, but I believe he's not letting him stand in the way anymore, and do what it takes to no longer have to deal with the human threat to mutants. And if that is killing some X-Men, then that is what he has to do. And ultimately, he puts these medals in Professor X's medal and says, I was going to say this, shut up. The overall plan here for the Blue Team changes. Professor X obviously realizes Magneto's not going to reverse what he did on this planet, so he tells Cyclops telepathically, I have to hijack Magneto's powers, and I have to control him and make him do it myself, because he's not going to do it. So we have to get his helmet off so I can control his powers. Now, ultimately, this does end up happening. Wolverine jumps on him, but he does manage to take his helmet off. Professor X manages to control them. However, unfortunately, Gold is dealing with a bit of a situation. Sinister ends up controlling Cable. You see the gem in his head, which incredibly powerful, being the offspring of essentially Jean/Magneto, Cyclops is, and Cyclops. Cable is just incredibly powerful, and he's about to kill Jean, so Jean telepathically communicates with Scott just to say, love you, before she evidently dies. Now, I kind of think that maybe Jean lets Cable do this because she still kind of does feel like Cable is part her son, and maybe doesn't want to have to kill him, so maybe she lets him do this, or maybe he's just that powerful. Again, he is the offspring of two incredibly powerful mutants. He more than likely could be stronger than her, especially being controlled by Sinister. But unfortunately, Cyclops sees this and he knows that Gold Team needs more time. So while Professor X is controlling Magneto and reversing everything, Cyclops interrupts it just like Star-Lord interrupted the Avengers taking on Thanos. Unfortunately, this results in Magneto throwing his helmet on Professor X, blocking his powers, and starting to crush it to kill him. Again, not sure he would have actually killed him, but in this moment, maybe he would have. But fortunately/unfortunately, Wolverine jumps in, stabs him through the stomach/chest area, stopping him from killing Professor Xavier, but unfortunately pissed Magneto off enough to where he did something that he's always wanted to do. Rip the adamantium out of Wolverine. This is an incredibly huge moment from X-Men 25 in the comics, and even if you haven't read that, you've most likely at some point in time probably seen the image of it. What an incredible moment that I didn't actually think they would do in X-Men 97. Now this leaves us with some questions. One, no, I don't think Wolverine is dead. There's a lot more story that they can do with Wolverine. He'll simply have his bone claws. I do believe he will heal from this, and there's a lot more story to tell in Season 2 and a confirmed Season 3 as well. We're also led to believe that possibly Storm and Forge are dead. I don't think either of those two are dead. They'll pick up with those two in the next episode. However, Jean and Onslaught are kind of the big topics right now. Is Jean dead? Again, Phoenix is mentioned a lot, and in the opening intro, we've seen the Phoenix a lot as well. Is this hinting that this story is going to return, that Jean is going to return? I believe so, but the only question is she going to return in the finale in the next episode, or is she going to return later on down the line? The reason I believe that it could be later on down the line is because I think we might be leading to a huge X-Men division in Season 2/ at the end of the finale, and I think that if Cyclops believes she's dead, he'll leave the X-Men team. We kind of could get that Cyclops anti-hero storyline. I think we probably do get that in Season 2. And then Jean returning could be what brings him back. Now, of course, after this event happens, in the comics, after Magneto rips the adamantium from Wolverine, essentially Charles does a lobotomy on him. And then Charles has all of this built up anger, remorse, sadness, basically every kind of emotional/negative feeling that Professor X has ever really had comes in contact with Magneto's feelings of anger and rage and vengeance and also grief. And they connected this way when Professor X went and shut down Magneto's mind. And the result of this was Onslaught, a sentient psionic being created from the consciousness of Professor X and Magneto, and one of the coolest characters we've really seen. Now, I don't think he's going to show up in the finale. I think this might be a Season 2 thing. If he does show up in the finale, that might be what the X-Men need to defeat Bastion. But I feel like that would be introducing a lot very quickly for a finale that's probably only going to be 45 minutes to an hour long, so most likely Season 2. Another thing that I think we might see in Season 2 is the return of Apocalypse. Remember, Apocalypse is not dead. He is simply kind of trapped for the time being. The reason I hope Apocalypse will return is so he can make Gambit a horseman, essentially bringing him back to life. And that way is how we could get Gambit back. And I also think Rogue is going to go a little rogue, but I do think she is going to leave the X-Men with Cyclops, maybe go their separate ways, but she's not going to be a part of Professor X's X-Men anymore. She obviously left to join Magneto, but Gambit could be that person that brings her back if Apocalypse turns him into a horseman. So really, a lot of things could happen in Season 2 that seem very, very exciting, but the big question is, how will Season 1 end? We will find out next episode. So drop all of your theories in the comments down below and let me know what you thought of episode 9. It was certainly insane and I loved it. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can get the next breakdown for X-Men 97 and future Marvel videos as well. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Wolf Wolf.
It's often pretty easy to feel pessimistic about the current state of the video game industry. between predatory monetization, ever-increasing prices, ever-decreasing creativity, that world that was once dominated by innovation and imagination can feel like it's slipping away. We've swapped out memorable experiences for hyper-engagement, and for an old dog like me, you can sometimes look around and barely recognize the hobby you fell in love with. This depressing landscape means it's all the more surprising that amidst the endless live service failures, copycat trend chasing, a deeply unfashionable relic of the 1990s has come roaring back into popularity. The survival horror genre is currently experiencing a monstrous revival after almost 2 decades in the wilderness, and is arguably in a golden age, dominating headlines, awash with critical acclaim, and drawing in millions for its creators. What makes this all the more impressive is that this revival is happening in both the world of independent and AAA development, and for every smaller sleeper hit like Signalis, Tormented Souls, or Darkwood, there's a big budget companion in Resident Evil 2, the Callisto Protocol, Dead Space. We clearly can't get enough of exploring dark hallways and managing inventories, so it should come as no surprise that every single publisher with a once great survival horror IP is looking to get back into the action. In the past 12 months, we've seen the announcement of a Silent Hill 2 remake, trailers for an all-new Alan Wake game, the release of another Resident Evil remake, and even the return of Alone in the Dark. Given the industry's current obsession with high-quality remakes, these modern horror resurrections are a clear union of everything that's currently fashionable, creating a rare mixture that manages to satisfy developer, publisher, and consumer in one fell swoop. It's this clear path to success that makes those series that haven't returned all the more curious, as studios that are usually happy to chase modern trends seem content to leave money on the table and fans confused by the silence. Today we're going to explore one of the iconic sleeping giants of this genre, a franchise that on the surface looks like the perfect candidate for a modern revival, but upon closer inspection masks some of the most bizarre franchise building the video game industry has ever seen. It's a mash of mediums, genres, and narratives, equal parts cinematic blockbuster, spine-tingling horror, and experimental RPG. A true artifact of a world before live services and monetization. A symbol of a time when video games were authentic, imaginative, and above all else, strange. This is a lengthy Parasite Eve retrospective, and it's time to awaken from our uneasy dreams. As we're going to discover in this video, Parasite Eve isn't exactly a traditional franchise, and so it should come as no surprise that our twisted journey begins not with the release of a video game, but with the publication of a novel. In 1995, a young author called Hideaki Senna had his first book picked up by the publishing wing of Kadokawa Corporation, and much to the surprise of both parties, it quickly began to gain traction, becoming the talk of bookstores, reading clubs across Japan. This surprise hit was called Parasite Eve, a 300-page science fiction thriller that shocked conservative Japanese audiences with a blend of twisted body horror, captivating mystery, and real-life scientific theory. You see, Senna's writing was deeply influenced by his time working as a pharmacologist, and the core concept of his book explores the very real theory of symbiogenesis. Without getting too deep into the complexities of genetic biology, it's a scientific theory that the modern cells which make up most living creatures evolved from a union of ancient bacteria and microscopic organisms. This symbiotic relationship would eventually turn into the nucleus-based cells that you recognize from your science classes, with the bacteria becoming the energy-producing mitochondria that power all life. Now, despite the complex science that influenced it, the idea behind Parasite Eve's narrative is simple. What if that benevolent cellular union was parasitic? And what if the mitochondria had malevolent intent for their human hosts? The novel begins with the death of a young woman called Kiyomi Nagashima, who crashes her car in mysterious circumstances. Her husband, a biological scientist called Toshiaki, finds himself unable to accept this cruel twist and begins experimenting on cultivated cells from her body, dreaming that this work will be able to bring her back to life. While Toshiaki slowly descends into madness, Kiyomi's organs are donated to a local hospital, where her kidneys end up in Mariko Azai, a schoolgirl in desperate need of a transplant. At first, her condition improves, but very quickly her doctors and father begin to notice that all is not well. Mariko frequently complains of a burning pain in her abdomen, and eventually begins having chronic panic attacks, convinced that there's something growing inside of her. It's horror in the classic sense of the genre, combining Shelley's Frankenstein and Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, both disgusting us at the terrible things that can happen inside of our bodies, while also exploring that gothic fear of life beyond death. Now, as the book progresses, Senna blends these archetypal influences into a surprisingly fresh form by heavily relying on that scientific background. One night in Toshiaki's laboratory, he discovers that the cells from Kiyomi's body have become sentient and form a being called Eve that takes on his dead wife's image. Now, the character of Eve is once again rooted in the real world, as mitochondrial Eve was the name that scientists gave to the theoretical common ancestor that all humans can trace their genetic ancestry to. She's supposedly an East African woman who lived 200,000 years ago, and of course the name Eve refers to the biblical character who birthed the first humans. In Senna's story, Eve is the combined consciousness of all mitochondria who have been influencing humanity from behind the cellular curtain. They guided our transformation from primeval apes into higher beings, and here we find them ready to emerge from the shadows and announce their existence. Eve had influenced Kiyomi into crashing her car, influenced Toshiaki to experiment on her body, and forced Mariko to accept her kidney. The master plan is to unite all three of these characters and to create the ultimate mitochondrial entity, a creature that can change its genetic code at will, allowing it to supplant humanity as the dominant species. Now, this crazed revelation leads to a pretty exciting final 100 pages. Eve is rampaging through the university and hospital, causing the mitochondria in those who oppose her to set their hosts ablaze, and forcibly birthing the ultimate being, who is, unsurprisingly, a horrific monster. Things, of course, resolve in a flash of tragedy and misfortune, as Eve's plan falls apart thanks to a critical error. While genes are passed on through maternal mitochondria, they still require those of the father, and without them, her ultimate being is born imperfect and dies screaming in confusion, comforted only by Toshiaki, who sacrifices himself to contain its terrible power. For Japanese audiences, this was horror unlike anything they'd seen before, and the book was awarded the first ever Japan horror novel award, recognizing its popularity with both critics and casual readers. Senna quickly became a household name, with some magazines even calling him Japan's answer to Stephen King. And within just a year, he had media companies hounding him to sign away the rights to create other interpretations of Parasite Eve. Now, before we take a look at those inevitable adaptations, we need to quickly address the legacy of Parasite Eve, the novel, because despite this shining reception, time has actually been rather cruel to Hideaki Senna's breakout work. While it was hugely influential in kickstarting a new wave of dark Japanese storytelling, it never really interested publishers in the West, and it would take the surprise success of the 1998 film adaptation of The Ring for American and European audiences to really start to understand this unique style of horror. Now, unfortunately, while this caused a surge of interest in the ghostly aesthetics of The Grudge, Dark Waters, and the comics of Junji Ito, Senna's hardcore scientific theory ended up missing the boat. Amazingly, Parasite Eve was untranslated until 2005, and when it was finally released, the prose which had terrified stiff 90s Japanese audiences was rather lost on a market that had been raised on King, Barker, Lovecraft, and Poe. The novel currently sits at around a 3 out of 5 on Goodreads, and considering the number of very positive reviews from hardcore fans of the video games, that score is misleadingly generous. The key issue is that Senna's writing style is very cold and really lacks the human touch that makes horror feel so real and so terrifying. Large portions of the book concern themselves with densely detailed accounts of surgical operations or cell experiments. While this does make the science fiction ideas very believable, it's impossible to not feel like it's pulling you away from its other more interesting elements. With almost 200 pages of tough, non-fiction style writing to get through before the payoff, it's a surprisingly hard read, and one that Senna himself acknowledged by softening the tone of his future novels. Sadly, it also seems like some of the language hasn't exactly survived its translation, as certain lines feel very strangely constructed. Take this oddity, for example. Toshiaki absent-mindedly clenched his abdomen. He urinated at the sight of the thing. He could barely move. He clenched his abdomen. The gentle curve of the monster's pubic mound aroused him. Or how about the equally clunky, the monster snarled at Toshiaki. Toshiaki, it bellowed. What? Toshiaki answered absent-mindedly. In order to grow in size, cells must fuse new lipid vesicles with the cell membrane, the monster growled. The vesicles are transported to the sites of fusion on actin cables. Toshiaki screamed. It reads like a combination of a Fangoria short story and a science reference book, and while its core ideas are fascinating, the execution, at least in English anyway, is very lacking and makes for a tough old read. It would have been a hard book to recommend in 2005, let alone in 2023, but what's important is that it was deeply popular in Japan in 1995, and film studios were circling like vultures, eager to extract their pound of media adaptation flesh. Now, the book's success was not only good news for Hideaki Senna, who was able to leave pharmacology and pursue a career as an author, but also for the book's publisher, Kadokawa Corporation. Amazingly, Kadokawa was primarily known for producing big-budget movies, and throughout the 70s, 80s, they had a string of domestic hits that encouraged them to step onto the global stage.
Yeah.